In this lesson, we need to calculate how much time is left between the end date and our current time, so whatever the current system time is. And we're going to be using a date method in order to accomplish this using date parse. So when we start the clock, we output that value, but if we take that date value and if we console log out using a method called date parse, and what this does is this returns a string representation of the date since counting the number of milliseconds since January 1st, 1970. So if we take that D object and we place it in here, we're going to get a numeric value. So try that again and make an update, and we see we get this millisecond update. So that's how many milliseconds, and we can use this value in order to calculate what the current value in milliseconds is since that start point of in December of 1970 or January 1st, 1970. And there's more information on the Mozilla Developer Network about it. So you can see that date parses a string representation of the date, returns a number in milliseconds since January 1st, 1970. So basically what we're doing is we're equating the two values, so we have the same starting point for the values, which is going to give us a number of milliseconds, and then those milliseconds we can use to subtract out and actually calculate out how many milliseconds are between the two dates. And there's an example over here where we've got date parse, so it's parsing that January 1st, 1970, and then we're also parsing out another date. And you can see that there's going to be two different numbers that are going to be returned here. And as it gets parsed out, JavaScript release, so this is when JavaScript was released, and this is the number of milliseconds since that start date. And you see that the Unix time is 0 because this is the starting point for the calculation. And if you actually go before this date, then you're going to get a negative number. So let's try that out within our own code, and we're going to get the milliseconds of this date, which we already have, and we're also going to get the milliseconds of what the current time is. Creating a variable, actually let's set up a new date first. So within here, it's just getting the new date. So this is getting the current date, and I'll console log out this information as we go along. So current date value. And instead of outputting it here, I'm going to pass that through console log there, and then we can take that value and we can output it once again there. So the last part in the console is now going to be the current date. So let's try that out. And we see that this is the current date, so it's January 3rd, 2019, and the date that we're looking for is January 30th, 2019. So next we need to standardize them so that they're in the same format. So if we take our console log and if we update using date parse, so remember again turning it into milliseconds, and we take our current date value, so that object value, and we output that, you're going to see that now when I change it, we're going to get two numbers in milliseconds. And obviously the latter one, so the January 16th, is a larger number than the current one, so that's how we can calculate out how many milliseconds are between the two. So now we can make that calculation, and let's calculate out the number of time that's between them. We can just use a variable called t for time. So taking that end date, which is going to be the bigger one, unless you've set your timer to be before this current date, but that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. And then taking this value, we're going to get the number of milliseconds. So let's console log out t so that we can see that in the console as well. So now when I change it, we're actually going to get the number of milliseconds between the two. And as you can see, if I do go negative, we get a negative number. So we definitely don't want a negative number in our countdown. And if the number is negative, then that means that we've reached that time. So then we don't have anything to count down to, of course. So this is the number of milliseconds that is being output. So all we have to do is return that value in the time left. So I'll console log out time left, as we're going to be returning something here. So we're returning t for now. And I can I'll comment out these console messages and we'll remove them afterwards. So now we have a value of t. This is how many milliseconds. And in order to get an actual number of days, hours, minutes, seconds out of it, we need to do some calculations. And we can do this by doing, so seconds would be equal to math floor, and this is getting rid of all of the decimal places. And let's do a calculation. So we have our value of t. If we divide it by 1,000, that's going to give us the number of seconds that we have available to us. That value of seconds, how many seconds do we have in a minute? We have 60. So anything that's beyond that, that's going to be moved into minutes. Do the same thing for minutes. And I'll show you how this works out afterwards. So again, math floor and the same calculation. So we've got our t divided by 1,000. So the same thing that we're doing that break by milliseconds. And this time we need to divide that value by 60 so that we're not overlapping the number of seconds. And then we're going to do a modulus of 60. So what the modulus does is it returns the remainder amount. So let's say, for instance, we have, let me clear this, make this bigger. Let's say we have a value of 1,000 and we do modulus 60, it's going to return back 40. Because we can multiply 60 so many times until we hit 960. And once we hit 960, there's no more 60s that can go in there. So we get a modulus return value of 40. So let's do one more. So if we do 45 and we do a modulus of 9, what do you think the answer is going to be? It's going to be 0 because 9 goes into 45 exactly, so there's no remainder. But if we do 46 modulus of 9, what do you think the answer is going to be? It's going to be 1 because we get a remainder of 1. And 2 and 3 and so on. So this is how we can calculate out how much is remaining, because once we divide it out, so we get a number here returning back that value that we had here within our selection, and we're taking that value and we're first dividing it by 1,000. So that will leave this many seconds, and if we take this value and if we get a modulus of 60 of it, that gives us 36 seconds. So that's how much is currently left, and as that number changes and updates, we're going to have different amount of seconds. And if we take this number and if we divide it by 60, you're going to get this many minutes are left. So it's 34 minutes. And once again, if we take this number and if we, because we know within a day there's 24 hours, so we want to find out exactly how many days are in here. So if we take this value, we multiply it by 60 and multiply it by 60 again, this is going to give us the number of hours. And of course, we need to wrap this so that we can do the calculation first and then return back that value. So let's add the 1,000 in. So we need to know how many days are going to be between there. The number of hours that are available, that are remaining. And if we want the number of days, then we just need to multiply by 24, this number. So we move the 24 in there, in that formula. And now it's going to return back how many days are remaining between here. And of course, we've got that 1,000 in there, so we're not getting the exact day. But this way, we're getting that there's 11 days that are being returned back. And we can see that that calculation actually comes out true. So if we have 15 and minus 3, so there's 11 days and some hours remaining. So let's bring that into our formula, and you can try this out for yourself within the console as well. So it takes a little bit of practice to get used to what's going to be returned back, but that's essentially how the modulus works. So if we have hours, we're going to take our math and floor, and what math floor is doing is it's getting rid of all those decimal places. So instead of having 11.98, we're just going to be simply returning back 11. So taking the value of t, dividing it by, and the number that we want to divide it by is going to be 1,000 times 60 times 60, so whatever that value is, and we're simply returning back that modulus of 24. And let days, and then one last one, floor, and taking the value of t, dividing it by 1,000, 60, or you could calculate out what this value is and simply divide it by that value if you wanted to. We're going to return back whatever the value of t was, so that gives us our total value. Next, let's return back days and use the variable days. And we've got hours. We return back our value for hours. And we'll close off the object there. and minutes. And these are all values that we can then utilize within our JavaScript to output those values that are going to be then visible to the person interacting with the application. So we've got our total, we've got our days, minutes, hours, and so on. And we're returning that value back to the user. So let's beautify that, clean that up a bit. Before we try that, let's get rid of that bracket and refresh. So now when I hit whatever value, we can see that the total is 11 days, 23 hours, 30 minutes, 2 seconds, and we're ready to output that to the user. So that's coming up in the next lesson. So try this out for yourself and break down the number of milliseconds from that Unix timestamp date of January 1st, 1970, and use that in order to calculate the difference in milliseconds between the current date and the suggested date for the timer end, and then calculate out the minutes, hours, days, seconds, and then return that within your JavaScript function.